Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today, our Sunday morning Bible class. We're here having Friends Day today, and I see a number of faces that we don't always have with us, so it's very glad to see some guests. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us today. Before we get started, I'd like to have a word of prayer. Is there anyone we need to keep in specific mind? I know Anita let me know that Donnie's not feeling well today. Dave Conyers is at home. You found the quickest way to get rid of a cold was to give it to your husband? Good job, Jackie. Anyone else? Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for all the ways that you've shown us love. Father, thank you for continuing to want us to be your people, that we can spend eternity with you. Father, as we go into this hour of study, help us to focus our minds and to learn what you'd have us to learn from your word. Father, we ask that you be with those members who are sick at home, be with Donnie and Dave, and help them both to be well soon. We ask that you bless our worship here, and Father, allow it to be just how you'd like it to be. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. So we're going to continue on with our Sunday morning Bible class as normal, and we'll let our guest speaker have his own lessons today, but we're learning from the Gospel Advocate Foundation's book. We're on Lesson 7, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Now, we've moved quite a bit ahead on our timeline. We're going through a study of families, and the last family that we touched on was the relationship between Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. So kind of a sibling-type relationship. Today, we're going to look at a very different set of family. We're going to look at Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Very different situation. And what I want to do, our lesson text, I'll go ahead and read it since it comes right off the top, and I'll read it right out of the book if you want to follow along from Ruth chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion died. So the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. So the setup for this story is fairly simple. We have a family from the tribe of Judah. And there's a famine in the land of Israel, and so they need to go find food somewhere. And so they look around and they pick Moab out. Now, if you look where Moab is, a lot like we learned about last week or 2 weeks ago, where Egypt might have had some floodwater-based crops that would not fail. Moab is going to be on the eastern side or the other side of the Dead Sea, and there's some rivers flowing in there that maybe they were able to make crops, whereas Israel was not. It's a little less sure on that because I don't think their farming process was like that of the Egyptians, where they had the mass watering of crops and things. But in any case, they go over to Moab. Now, we know from Deuteronomy that God doesn't normally approve. He doesn't approve of the mixing of the Israelites and the people around them. And we'll go ahead and think about this. The people of Moab, the Moabites, come from the lineage of Moab. And Moab is the son of the incestuous relationship of Lot and his daughters after Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. And so the people of Israel really didn't have a lot to do with Moabites generally. There was a bad relationship there. When Israel attempted to flee Egypt, it was the Moabites that sought Balak out to curse the Israelites. And so there was an ongoing bad relationship between the Moabites and the Israelites. But in any case, we see that Elimelech and his wife Naomi, they set out to the land of Moab, and they looked to be building a home there based off of, maybe it was temporary, but it doesn't really look that way, especially after the sons, after Elimelech dies and the sons take wives. It kind of looks to be a permanent thing. They've now got Moabite wives, and so they kind of look to be permanent. Let's talk about the state of widows during this time. With no obvious male relative around, what would have been the state of a widow? Think she was well off and living off of her Social Security check and just fine, just watching her pennies? I don't think so. I think it was a tough life. A lot of labor back then would have been very physical in nature, would have been agricultural. And an older widow would have really had a hard time doing that. They weren't in the land of Israel, so there wouldn't have been any type of law stating that people should leave part of their crops so that they could glean. There may have been really no social safety net of any kind there for these women. And so it would really be a harsh thing, especially for a woman to lose not only her husband, but both of her two sons that should have been responsible for taking care of her. So that would have really been a tough situation with not a lot of good options.
I don't know how much of importance it is, but there's the famine. But they live in Bethlehem, which is house of bread.
House of bread. So it affected even the house of bread, right? Isn't that unusual that the Bethlehem is the house of bread, and yet there's famine in the land that they feel the need to leave? So it also may make me wonder if Elimelech wasn't really that well off to begin with, and he was especially vulnerable. It just doesn't seem like their family had a lot going for them in a financial way at various times, which is okay. But yeah, we have to make choices. Everybody has to make choices. We see people, they get a better job offer and they need to move away, and we're sad about that. But that's what's best for their family, and we see Elimelech making those same choices. We definitely don't want to move away from the Lord when we move, though. So I'll skip down to our next lesson text in verse 8. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return, each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "Surely we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons, would you wait for them until they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." We'll pause right there, even though our reading continues. So we see Naomi as the older widow who's now taken the leadership role in the family. She looks at her sad situation and she realizes that she doesn't have a lot of hope for her daughters-in-law. She has no sons to offer them. We know in Deuteronomy that the law of marriage or the Levirate law, if you will, that it would have been normal for if a woman was married to a son or a man, if the man died, a younger brother or another brother would marry his widow, and so that way the first son that would be born would carry the name of the original husband's name. That way the family lineage could continue, and that was a process for taking care of young widows. But Naomi points out the problem. She doesn't have any additional sons. There's no hope for her to have sons in the near future. She's got nothing to offer them. And so she recognizes that they're really in a bind. She doesn't have a really means to provide for her. I will also say this. They're all sad about this. Initially, both the daughters-in-law, so their names will be Ruth and Orpah, they're both very, very sad about this. And they say, "No, we're going to stay with you. We're going to stay with you." And Naomi really pushes them away, and she says, "No, it's time for you to go back to your own house. You need to find rest in the family of your own people." Now, by this, she doesn't mean you need to, go somewhere and they're going to take care of you. The type of rest she'd be referring to is you need to find a new husband that's going to make you secure, and you'll be able to raise up your own children. You'll be able to have your own household. And so the rest she's talking about would probably be find your own family situation and look from among your people. They're still in the land of the Moabites, and so it would be probably pretty easy for them to find a Moabite husband, would be the guess. So we see that there's this option that the two daughters-in-law are given. We'll pick up our reading in Ruth 1, verse 14. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." She's telling her, Orpah's going back to her family. You should do the same thing. In verse 16, Ruth replies, "But Ruth said, 'Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me.' And when she, being Naomi, saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her." So we see when the choice comes to Ruth, she's going to make a different decision than Orpah. She's going to say, "No, I'm not going to leave my mother-in-law. We've been bound up as a family." Ruth recognizes the terrible state that Naomi is in. She's going to be destitute. She's probably going back to her own people to become a beggar. And she doesn't want that for her, or she's going to go with her to help her in that process or be what aid she can be. Even the travel from the land of Moab back to her home country of Bethlehem could have been potentially treacherous, and maybe she felt like she could have been somewhat of a protector or helper. I don't know everything that went into this decision. We also see her declare that your God shall be my God, which makes us wonder how closely had Elimelech's family worked with these Moabite women to teach them the ways of the Israelite people, to teach them about the true and living God, to pull them out of idolatry, to make them realize that they needed God in their lives and that they should serve Him. We're not given a lot in the way of that. That's not the primary purpose of this book, but I think it's interesting that she at least knows, she certainly knows the God of Naomi, and she's now receptive and has a declaration of faith here that she'll remain faithful to that God. So we see that's a huge commitment there. And this really shows us the relationship that our family should have, right? A strong family is going to be built on loyalty and trust. I think often today, our society would have us watch a number of Hallmark movies. And the girl needs to go to her small hometown and find the boy that she was with in high school and realize that was the one she should have been with all along, and they should have about 2 magical moments, and then the next scene is them getting married, right? Highly emotional, not so much rational, and that's what love is. But look at the picture of love that the daughter-in-law Ruth has for her mother-in-law Naomi. Does anybody want to comment on that? What do you think? Let me ask a better question so you can answer it. What is a long-term relationship form of love built on? Is it built on emotion? What's it built on? Love. It's built on love. What kind of love? Trust. You got to have trust, right? Honesty, loyalty. The loyalty piece, right? We all know that we're going to rub each other the wrong way from time to time. We're going to make decisions that are different, not necessarily sinful, but different. Things will be done in a household that one spouse or one relative disagrees with that the other one won't, right? So why doesn't the house instantly split up the moment that first argument occurs? The moment the first fight occurs? It's the commitment. I heard the word commitment. It's a commitment. A commitment has been made. Now, obviously, Ruth didn't make any type of commitment directly to Naomi prior to her declaration here. But now she's made this declaration, and in many ways, it's very similar to a declaration that might be made to a husband and wife, right? Very similar type of declaration. In fact, this passage is often read at marriage ceremonies today because it's so beautiful, and it embodies a lot of the ideas that a marriage entails.
And it ends with "till death do us part," really.
And it ends with "till death do us part."
A little bit differently, but I mean it is to that level.
That's right.
And as we see, kind of skipping ahead maybe, but we see the amount of effort that Ruth has to go through She's signing up for a big commitment.
Ruth is signing herself up for a big commitment, and we'll get to see in the next chapters whether she honors her commitment or not, right? So let's press along. I'm not going to follow our text skips quite a bit, and so I won't skip quite that much. I'm going to fill in a little bit with just some overview. In chapter 2, what's going to happen is we're going to see that Naomi and Ruth, they've traveled back to their home country, so we're back in the land of Israel. We're in the Bethlehem area. And so, Naomi and Ruth, they've made this long trip. They've gotten there. We don't hear of any problems on the way. Maybe Ruth looked out for Naomi quite well. I don't know. Maybe they hired on. The Bible doesn't tell us. They get there, and immediately we see that Ruth is going to go to work. And how is she going to feed herself and Naomi? Gleaning, right? So Naomi has clearly taught the culture to Ruth, and so Ruth is going to go out and she's going to need to glean in the field. Now we know that in the Old Testament, the law was that when you glean your field, you wanted to leave the edges, you wanted to leave some behind. You didn't want to go back and pick the second, and that was so that the impoverished people could go out and have enough food to eat and survive, right? It wasn't a giveaway. You weren't commanded to give a certain percent to the poor, but you were to put some out there, and so able-bodied people could go out and work and get some produce for themselves. Would have been very difficult work. My Bible has some pictures of, I can't imagine using a sickle or some type of device to harvest anymore. Probably the older people can. I see the implements sometimes on walls in restaurants, and they look quite difficult and dangerous to use. But here we have Ruth, and she's going out, and she's going to have a rather fortuitous meeting. So she's going to go out to the field in chapter 2, verse 3, and it says, "And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech." Now, Ruth is certainly not going to know this. This is a really providential thing where God is going to put her in the right place at the right time, and we'll see that as it goes on. And Boaz is someone we meet here, and the first action that we see from him is something that makes us think rather well of him. He's going to look to the men that work for him, and he says, "Hey, who's that over there?" Makes me think maybe Ruth was an attractive lady. I don't know. Sometimes that helps, right? But he asks about her, and they say, "Hey, she's Ruth. She's a Moabitess, and she came with Naomi," right? And so I think that introduction of Ruth to Boaz also says good things about Ruth, because he sees that she's stuck with her mother-in-law, and now she's out there working and providing. She's in the field for most of the day, and she's working. And so Boaz goes ahead and starts taking care of her, even though he really doesn't know much about her at this point. He's going to tell his men, "Hey, make sure you leave plenty in the field. If you drop some, leave it there. Let her pick it up. And make sure that she's going to be safe and that she's not going to be attacked while she's working." And then by the end of that day, he does go to her and says, "Hey, look, I want you to glean in my fields. Don't go anywhere else. I've instructed my people to look out for you and make sure that you're safe." And the Bible even tells us that at the end of the day, I may struggle to find it, but at the end of the day, she gets some amount, and my Bible commentary says, it's unlikely that she would have been able to gather that much on her own in a single day had Boaz not purposely told his people to leave some behind. So he was making her life a little easier even on day one. She puts in a full day's work. I think here the lesson is that if you're able to work, it's probably best for you to do so. It gives you that sense of purpose that we've talked about on numerous times. And, she was able to provide. So that's kind of the setup for chapter 2. The interesting thing is we're going to get to chapter 3, and then Naomi's going to realize what a providential thing has occurred. So in chapter 3, we'll read verse 1. "Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight and the threshing floor.'" And that's where she's going to start her plan. But we need to go ahead here and talk about the Goel or kinsman redeemer. I think our lesson text talks a lot about it. And we see that, I believe, in Ruth 2:20. So let's go back to Ruth 2:20. I skipped ahead. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead." And Naomi said to her, "This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives." I think I'm reading from the New King James, and so it's close relatives is the translation. But the word here is G-O''E-L, Goel. And this is going to be the idea of a kinsman redeemer. Now, we've seen this exact word earlier when the sanctuary cities, for those people who had murdered someone and they wanted to flee to a sanctuary city so that retribution was not given to them, the person who was a close relative of someone who was murdered, had the right to hold that person accountable for that murder. And so they had the right to go to the people and they could find them and kill that person because it was their right. That person had committed murder. And God set up 6 sanctuary cities, 3 in the north, 3 in the south. And the kinsman redeemer, or a close relative, had the right to murder the murderer if they weren't in a sanctuary city. And so this is where this idea of kinsman redeemer first comes about, and it's more like an avenger of blood. But here, we're not looking at a Goel in terms of an avenger of blood. We're looking at a kinsman redeemer, a close relative. So had Naomi had another son, that son probably would have served as the Goel, or kinsman redeemer, to her daughters-in-law. But since there wasn't one, it would fall to the next men in line, right? And so she says Boaz is one of these eligible men that's close enough related to my husband Elimelech to be this kinsman redeemer. And so this is a very important thought, because we definitely want to make New Testament applications on this today. Even though we want to focus on the family, I can't read the story of Ruth and not make applications today. But you need to know that Boaz is eligible to be the kinsman redeemer. So in chapter 3, Ruth is going to be told by Naomi exactly what to do, which customs she could follow that would have been common to the Israelite people, to let Boaz know that Ruth is interested in Boaz as a future husband. So we see Naomi works up this plan with going to Boaz, the uncovering of his feet, which is apparently somewhat of a custom back then, to basically for a woman to let a man know that she was interested in him. We see that Boaz is going to be delighted in this news. He's an older man. He says, "Wow, you're really wise about this, because you haven't sought a younger husband. You sought someone that could be a kinsman redeemer for you." And he is very happy with this news, but he says, "Look, I'm not the closest relative. This isn't my duty. I'm not first in line to perform the duty of kinsman redeemer for you." So he says, "What I need you to do is go out. Let's handle this thing in a tactful way." He sends her out first thing in the morning and says, "Let me take care of this." I don't want to get ahead of myself. Sometimes, since I don't preach right from the book, I don't talk right from the book, I'll get ahead of myself. And so let's pick up in Ruth chapter 4. So Boaz has told Ruth that he's going to handle this, and let's see what he does. Verse 1, "Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom he had spoken came by. And so Boaz said, 'Come aside, friend, and sit down here.' And so the man came aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down. And then he said to the close relative, 'Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you.' And the man says, 'I will redeem it.'" And then if you're following along in our book, 5 is where we're going to pick up. I'll read from here so it's got some continuity. "Then Boaz said, 'On the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance.' And the close relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. Today we would sign a contract, but they had this unusual custom. Therefore the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal, and Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. So we see Boaz as he's a wealthy guy. He's got land. He's known to be wealthy. And he handles this in a really tactful way. He knows that there's a kinsman redeemer that's closer to Naomi than he is. And so he goes out to the city gate, and that would have been where business was commonly transacted. It appears that if there was a land transaction, you could go there. And there would have been men, elders of the city, who could be witnesses. And so he directly approaches the closest redeemer and says, hey, look, I'm interested in performing this duty. But he tells him, are you interested in doing this? And the man at first says, oh yeah, I'll take some land. And what does Boaz spring on him after he says yes? Yeah, there's a bigger part of the deal. You'll need to take Ruth along as well and be your wife. And the man thinks about this, and I don't necessarily understand the details, but it appears that somehow him taking on Ruth and Elimelech's land would somehow interfere with his own inheritance, or maybe he wouldn't like that he would have to raise up a son after the name of Mahlon. Only in chapter 4 do we learn that Ruth is Mahlon's wife. And so he doesn't like that situation too good. So, it almost appears that Boaz is astute enough to say, hey, I've got a good deal for you. You just got to do this. And then he says, oh, wait, here's the catch, right? Oh, you may not like this catch. Knowing that Boaz is a wealthy guy, more than likely he probably knew this other gentleman's financial situation or inheritance situation. My guess is that he had a good idea that he really wouldn't want to do it. But anyway, we see him proceed, and he's got these witnesses as well. Why is it sometimes a good idea to take witnesses with you when you're dealing with something that is potentially a controversial issue? Anybody want to say it? That's right. That's right. You need an honest account of what has happened, right? You wouldn't want to have anything untoward. I think it also did a service to both Naomi and Ruth in that it was out in the open. There was really nothing done in secret. Certainly Boaz and Naomi and Ruth, they kind of developed the initial relationship in secret. But as far as the legal and transactional purpose of this, it was done wide out in the open, where there was really nothing to be said. And the only person that had a right to complain or say anything would have been this other closest kinsman, and he's approached directly. So we see him really handle this business in what I would consider an airtight way. And so we see the exchanging of the sandals so that it's a confirmed deal for all of the people to see. A brief aside, the only time that I remember having two wrong pair of shoes on was in high school. It was I had a major paper that we had worked on for 6 weeks due that week, and I worked about 40 hours, and that was the only time, and my wife got to see me, and she got to laugh. So she can still smile about that today. That's the only time I've worn two different pair of shoes that I knew of. But we see he does this as a signal that this transaction has occurred, and Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer for Naomi and Ruth. So what's going to happen now is Boaz can now take financial care directly of both Naomi and Ruth as his wife. And so we see that Naomi and Ruth are brought out of this really terrible situation, and they are now members of the community. Now, certainly a couple of things we want to think about. We know the children of God really weren't to intermarry with people outside of that, right? And so it's very interesting here. We don't see this really as a negative. We don't see anyone vetoing Ruth as a Moabitess. I tried to read some scholarly works on this, and the truth is I think a lot of people feel like either the laws weren't being carefully enforced at the time, or that our assumption of how that process was to work may be flawed in some way. I really don't know. It doesn't appear that God doesn't really have anything negative to say about this relationship, and so we see that that this is going to continue. And in fact, at the end of chapter 4 becomes probably the most important part. And I'll just summarize this. So Ruth and Boaz become married. Of course, they go on to have children. And one of the children that they're going to have is Obed. And Obed is the father of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. David is going to be the king of Israel. And then going all the way to our New Testament, Jesus Christ will come through that line. So Jesus will have this Moabite woman in his lineage, clear as day. In fact, many of the people, when they write, the overarching theme of Ruth, only one of two books named after a woman, is that God uses this situation to continue his promise to the people of Israel, right? And it provides information about David. Interestingly, we don't exactly know who wrote Ruth. There's some thoughts about who it could have been, but certainly with verses 13 through 22, some people think maybe they were tagged on later, an earlier person, but it needed pretty much, would have had to have been someone that knew that David was king. So this would have been written several years after the fact, more than likely, or certainly that end tag had to be written after the fact. We don't know exactly who wrote it. So that's the story in a nutshell. I didn't go into all the detail that we could have. I forgot to tell you that Naomi was so bitter in her spirit that she wanted to be called Mara, which means bitter. Should have told you that earlier, but I think you all got the picture that she was a grieving widow. But a couple of things that I want to bring out about this kinsman redeemer, because I want to make the New Testament application today. Let me get to my right page so I don't forget anything. There was a few requirements for the kinsman redeemer. And when we say them out loud, I think you'll be amazed at the obvious New Testament application. So a kinsman redeemer, we said they had to be a relative, right? Some kind of close relative. That could have been the brother of the deceased, or it seems like there could have been some other relatives, but it needed to be a close relatives. What else did Boaz have going for him that allowed him to be a kinsman redeemer? Can you think of any qualities he had? That's right, he was honest. So, was he wealthy or poor? He was wealthy, right? So he had to be in a better situation than the person that he was going to redeem, right? So we saw that Naomi and Ruth were financially destitute, but Boaz is in a better state than they are. What about the first kinsman redeemer? He probably could have been the redeemer, right? But he chose not to be. So what does that tell us today about the kinsman redeemer? They have to be willing, right? So they have to be willing. So we're going to make that application today because the word Goel is used in the New Testament as well. And who is it in relation to? Jesus, the Redeemer of Israel, or the Redeemer of all of man, right? So let's make those three applications. How is Jesus related to each person today? When we become a Christian, what are we called? A child of God, right? And Jesus is he's our Savior, but he's also our brother. So he's a relative, right? Is he in the same situation with sin as we are? Nope. He didn't sin. So he's in a better situation. He has the ability to bring us up with the power of his blood, right? So we see that he's eligible to be that redeemer because of that. And then the last one was willing. Was he willing? What was his prayer before the crucifixion? Let this cup pass from me, but yet not my will, but thine. He was willing. And so I think this is a beautiful story, and it's got so much application to our to Jesus himself. It's a beautiful parallel there, and it makes for a wonderful study if you have time. I want to go through some discussion questions though from this book, if I could. Question number 5 in our book. What did Naomi say was against her in Ruth 1 verse 13? She tells her daughter-in-law something is against her. Age is against her. I'll give her that, but that's not the one she said. Didn't make her life harder.
He says the hand of the Lord has gone out against her.
The hand of the Lord has gone out against me. You know,
Interesting that she says, when she says, call me Mara, when she goes back and the ladies that she knows there, don't call me Naomi, call me Nara, I'm bitter. She said, I left here full and I come back empty. And we wouldn't think if you have to run away from home and go somewhere else because of famine, because you're starving and you can't maybe make it easy, that you have to go into a foreign land. I wouldn't equate that with, well, we left here in fullness, but she could see it differently because now she'd lost her husband and both her sons.
that's right. She had lost everything that truly mattered. She had
Imagine
lost her
how she
husband and
felt when
nothing.
she left because of famine, but now she realized that wasn't as big a deal because she had her family. That hardship was a lot more.
That would have been a tough pill to swallow, I'm sure. But the hand of the Lord, and we have to look around today. People feel like the hand of the Lord is against them, right? Even if it's really not. If people get tough situations every day, and so we have to be there to support them and to let them know that God still loves them. He's still looking for a relationship with them, and He wants them to have that relationship with Him to lend that strength, right? As Jeremy pointed out, certainly as they left Bethlehem due to the famine and went to Moab, they thought they were in a terrible situation then, and she comes back and realizes that the situation is much worse for her. But God winds up turning that bad situation into something much better. All things work together, but it's hard to see sometimes, isn't it? Sometimes you gotta have a long range vision, because sometimes it's tough to see. We talked about the relationship. What lessons can we learn from Ruth's loyalty to Naomi? I think we talked about some of them. But her loyalty and her love were really demonstrated through her actions, right? Not just the words. We saw Orpah recognize that probably the nice thing to do for her mother-in-law would be to stay with her and assist her as she makes this transition. But she lets the words of Naomi talk her out of it, right? Even though she might have thought she knew what the right thing to do was. She lets her mother-in-law talk her out of it and go back go back into the world of the Moabites, right? But we see Ruth makes a different commitment based off of not just a brief emotional moment, but she's looked at the situation and she says, I'm going to be here. This is it. I'm not going to back away from this. And so we see that commitment is what keeps that going even through difficult times. And she's willing to heed her mother-in-law, right? Her mother-in-law, in my opinion, suggests some things that would have seemed unusual as far as going and gleaning the field and how to let Boaz know that she was interested in a marriage situation. I think, being a woman from Moab, they probably didn't have the same custom, and so that could have seemed a bit unusual. But she heeds her mother-in-law's advice. She yields to her better judgment, and we see everything works out. I think that can be real tough today always. Everybody remembers being little and thinking that someone's given them some advice that seems absolutely crazy, and then either being glad that they did it or wishing they had followed that good advice, even though it didn't seem good at the time. A lot of the advice that God gives us about our lives, when we're in that specific moment, it might seem like we could make a better choice. So many of the families that we've already studied have tried to assist God's plan on their own way, right? If we could say it that way. But we know that if we do as we're told by God, who is a being who doesn't make error and is infinitely wise and has excellent judgment, we know if we follow his plan for our lives, that's going to be what's best.
Ruth had a lot of commitment, and she acted on what she said. And you said actions speak louder than words. And it applies to James chapter 1, where it talks about we're to be doers of the word, not just hearers.
That's right. That's right. She backed up her commitment every step of the way. We saw Orpah, like I said, she backed away from it, but Ruth did not.
I think a big picture answer to that question too is we never know what God can do with our small decisions we make about our relationships with others, how we are committed to others and act of kindness that we do for people.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it's important, that we talk about family dynamics all the way through this, that they are introduced as daughters-in-law, but quite often they're called daughters. And how many of us, if we have, like I have 2 daughters-in-law, do I just call them a daughter? And I do at times. And I think that shows the love they had to each other and the responsibility to each other.
I think so. And if you think about it, especially back then, like I said, there were no social safety nets. And so really, when a woman became married to a family, she was buying in a little more wholeheartedly, right? Not only is this person going to be the person that I have children with and work with, but if something happens to my husband, his relatives are my social safety net for when I'm old. Hopefully we'll have our own children, but if that doesn't work out for us, then his relatives are who is going to be around to take care of me. And so you could see where that would take a big commitment. I've got some other questions from my other book that I wanted to go over. I thought they were also pretty good this week. How does Ruth's inclusion in the lineage of David and Jesus challenge traditional ideas about outsiders or foreigners in God's plan? Goes out the window? Terry said it goes out the window. I think we have to remember the biggest takeaway for me is that even though I would look at this situation if I was moving forward in time, and I would say this woman has no chance of being important to the nation of Israel, or certainly important to all of mankind. She's a Moabitess, right? Like, she's not the right person. But that's not how God works. That's not how God operates. God takes willing individuals who are willing to do what he wants them to do, who are willing to obey, and he can often magnify our efforts so many times more than we would ever imagine, right? That's why it's so important. We're told to plant the word in everyone's heart, right? We're to cast the seed because we don't know where it's going to grow. And we certainly, if we don't even know where the seed of the word is going to grow, we certainly don't know which one of those individuals might have an outsized impact on the kingdom of God, right? And become some individual that is able to lead families or entire nations back to the way of God. That's not our role. God handles that part. We're to do what we're supposed to do, even when we don't look like the right person. I think we see from time to time, individuals will come in, and sometimes I see them and I think, this person looks like they've had a little bit of a rough go of life. Maybe they've been on drugs, maybe they've been in alcohol, maybe they've just gone through a rough divorce, and it's just written on their face, man, I'm struggling. I'm in a tough way. And we can't discount that person, right? Just because we look at them with our human eyes and say, maybe that's not the person that's going to be really impactful, God can use that individual to make that impact.
We see Ruth and also the others that are mentioned in the genealogy as far as Bathsheba and the others. They're really exceptions to the rule, right? Because as you go to the next generation, hey, it's back to being Jews again.
That's right.
Even though there's some Gentile blood now flowing. But
Certainly that, and to mostly think about this as well. Back then, most of the time you would look to the father to determine the lineage. I think they, especially in that culture, would have looked at that. And so Boaz clearly has the right lineage to support that. If there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and wrap up and we'll prepare for our morning worship service. It'll begin at 10 o'clock.